I then came to a council meeting and we were talking about Rule of St Benedict, as one does, and thinking, how do we make it a little bit more accessible to people, which is where the Balanced Life project came up, which is to try to put into words a very ancient wisdom which comes from the Rule of St Benedict, and also the spirit of what he was trying to do, which was to help people to live life and live it in community and put it into a modern idiom. So I'm going to talk about the search for balance. And so there are, in fact, 4 keynotes, and you'll see when I present it to you, that they sort of make a whole. That's the idea about it, okay? So the opening words of The Road Less Travelled are, life is difficult. This pursuit for some form of balance is for each one of us, is set against whatever those particular challenges that we have are. Hopefully we have something big that helps us to balance out, but you can see we've got lots and lots of it's like showing the complexity of what it's actually really like life. You know, it's not just one thing against the other, it's one thing against lots and lots of different types of challenges. And this is the model which we have developed, and this comes from the research that Catherine was talking about at the very beginning. So we have listened to what the research was saying, and what we heard in what the young adults, 70 people responded, what we heard them say was that in fact there's 4 pillars which help us to build our lives, and they are purpose, having a sense of purpose, connection, being connected to other people, cultivating healthy habits. So whatever that means, it could be physical, mental health, it could be hobbies, anything which is like to help you to grow into a more rounded person and have discipline and things like that in your life. And the last one is impact, the impact that you have on the world and on others. So that's the sort of model which we've got. And if you look here, so for each of those pillars, there's a question. And the question is, for example, the purpose, why am I here? And then building connection, how do I relate to others? Cultivating healthy habits. When is it okay to focus on me? And then the last one, making an impact on the world. So I think the question is really then, how are we going to change the lives of people? What impact are we going to make on the world? So that's the 4th part of it. So the big finding for me in this research, and again, I'm obviously a remedial person, because when I tell you what my big finding was, you're going to think, Adam, you should have known that, okay? My big finding was that when I sent out the survey, I was trying to find out from people what made up a balanced life for them individually. Okay, so what is it that you do in order to make a balanced life individually? And then I realized that in fact, there is no such thing as a balanced life on its own, individually, because in fact we're all interconnected. So every decision that you make about whether you spend more or less time at work, more or less time on your hobbies, more or less time with your family, and all those things with your faith, all those things that make up your particular way of balancing out those balls, which we saw in the first graphic, inevitably it impacts on people around you, you know. So my choice to work in a company where I have to go off traveling and things like that, guess what? You know, do I live a balanced life, Barbara? Am I a paragon of a balanced life? No, I'm not, am I? No, so because it impacts on each other, you know, and really what you should be hearing is the 2 of us talk, because then you get to hear what it's really like, you know, and all those, let's say, compromises and sacrifices that you all make in order to live in harmony and to live a kind of balanced life. That's the reality of it. So that's why at the bottom of this it says, Sorry, it's a bit small, so I'll just read it out to you. How do I build my life with the help, support, and agreement of those with whom I am in relation? How do I do the same to help those people to build their lives? So it's as much about what I do for myself as it is what I do for others. And that's really important. I think for me that was like the most important thing to think about. And the other thing is that in the research which we did, there were no great revelations, I don't think, in terms of people. What did people say? They basically said we spend too much time on social media and too much time working, and we don't spend enough time praying, seeing our friends, doing hobbies, looking after our physical and mental health. Most of us don't feel that life is in balance. For women, it's 100% important. For men, it's less important. There's a little kind of 20% of men who don't care because they're sort of okay with just focusing on one thing, for example. And then the key issues that people wanted to focus on, physical and mental health, and developing better relationship skills, these types of things. So standing back from it all, no great revelations, but the interesting thing is this: the what is no surprise, the how is the big challenge. So really this weekend we want to allow ourselves the time to think about the how. My particular focus in this talk is to talk about purpose. So that's what I'm going to talk about for the rest of this session. And so we all have a purpose. And the question is, where do we get that sense of purpose from? So I think some of us get it because we have it almost like instilled in us from the way we're brought up. Some of it get it through our education. I listen to a lot of podcasts. I love the moment in a podcast with a famous person when they say, do you know what? I was at school and this teacher really believed in me. And that's what it was. And there's always a moment in those like people's life story when somebody believed in you and you kind of thought, yes, I can do it. So sometimes it's through great difficulty. And this is J.K. Rowling. And she literally thought her life had come to an end. And she was, as you know, famously sitting in the coffee shop of Edinburgh, writing out a book when she was with a child, lost her relationship, lost all her money, and was completely at rock bottom. And then she, in her commencement speech at Harvard, said, I got my sense of purpose from going down to that sort of low level. And sometimes it's something like that which really sort of makes us realize what it is that we're there for. I love Pope Francis. I think he's an absolute inspiration. And he's just brought out a letter. He called it Rejoice and Exult, Gaudete et Exultate. I saw a copy of it just there. And what he says to each of us in terms of purpose is that we all have a purpose which is important. And he says to be holy. Of course, that word there, remember what I said about words that immediately set up a reaction. Now, if I say to you, you are holy, the likelihood is you're going to think, Adam, you're not on this planet. I'm far from holy. I can think of many adjectives to describe myself, but holy is not one of them, okay? Well, that's not what Pope Francis thinks. He thinks that every one of us is called to be holy. And guess the way that he thinks that we're all going to achieve this holiness is? It's through doing a good job. It's about caring about the environment. It's about living relationships with kindness and things like that. It's all those very basic things. And he says that is holiness. So he's a great inspiration. And the last one is Steve Jobs. So if anyone in the tech world, this guy obviously still, though he's dead, walks on water. He was the guy who invented Apple, got fired, then got brought back in again, and then basically recreated Apple. And, we've all got the iPhone and the iPad and the iPod and all those things. They were all his genius. And so he says listen to your own inner voice. Okay? And he says, don't let other people's opinions drown. For me, this is the how of purpose. That's why each one of us, it's listening to your inner voice. And that's what Steve Jobs said. Just listen to what it is that you can do, you know. Forget about everybody else. Just what is it that I can do? And so I'm going to share with you 3 personal things about discerning purpose by listening to your inner voice. Okay? So the first is in silence. So the first way of hearing that inner voice is you've got to get rid of the noise. Now this photo here, these photos here are a thing called aumônerie, which is catechism for French kids. I did it for 7 years in France, thanks to Catherine, because aged 11, she said, Dad, I don't want to go to that. I'd like someone I know to be actually there. So I did aumônerie. And this is Lizzie there. Can you see Lizzie? Right. And this is Lizzie there. So Lizzie's our middle daughter. And these are her friends. Now this little group of people, Lizzie got together for aumônerie. And so she said, Dad, we want you to be the person. Every Saturday morning we went to the Fisher's house, and this was her friends. And it was like our very special time. So at the beginning of the year, I said to them, we're going to three or four things we're going to do in this catechism. We're going to have fun. We're going to read the Bible. We're going to discover the value of silence. This was to 11-year-olds, okay? So every week with the kids, I say, right, we're going to have our silent time now, kids. And every single week, they burst out laughing and could not survive in the silence at all. Every week. So I am failing, this is getting nowhere. I'm not a good catechist, this isn't working, I kind of had this plan. So March came, this was 6 months into it. They had been particularly loud and rumbustious the week before. And so I didn't even propose a time of silence. I thought, let's just forget this. I've, obviously failed in this. In any case, there was a little voice that came from one of these kids and said, Mr. Simon, Monsieur Simon, even though I told them they could call me Adam. Mathieu knows, very formal in France, okay. Monsieur Simon, haven't we forgotten our time of silence? So I said, yes. And she said, I'd like to pray for the victims of the Madrid bombing. It was a day after the Madrid bombing. And the silence of those kids, even now it makes the hairs stand up, the silence of those kids was something so beautiful. And of course, it was their silence, it was their space. It wasn't me imposing something on them. Right, we're going to have silence now. No, silence isn't something that you can impose. You have to discover it, you have to go into it. And many of us are very afraid of silence. Many of us are very afraid of it because we kind of go into a place where, it's easy to love others, but not always easy to love ourselves. And when we go into that silence, we can maybe confront things we don't like. In any case, but those kids, they took me in with them into a beautiful space of silence. And so that's one way, the how of finding the purpose for each one of us is to just find that space in silence. So the other way that I share with you is, I think in many ways, it's probably one of the most underestimated wonders of the world, which takes place every morning, will take place tomorrow at 8:15 here, and which we kind of take for granted a little bit. And it's called the dawn. And the dawn is an amazing thing. Every day the sun comes up. Have you ever just stood there and waited for the sun to come up and had that magical moment when suddenly you see the sun, that little first sign of it, and then very quickly, it comes up. So this is the cathedral about 4 or 5 minutes before dawn. Okay, this is the cathedral at dawn. It was just spectacular. So I call this in the fleeting radiance of the present moment. There is something so beautiful, and one of the things that we can do by like going and watching the dawn, or in many things, it could be listening to music, or it could be going to see a beautiful painting or something like that, is that we go into a beautiful, radiant moment. And then this is just after dawn. There. Gone. It's amazing. And so that's, for me, this is my second personal experience, is just to say, find those moments. If you want to find out more about like who you are and what's important, is to find those moments of fleeting moments of beauty when you can literally feel the beauty of the world. Okay. And the last one, and probably the most important one, is just in the quiet of your heart. So this is Worth Abbey. Those of you who have been brought up going to Worth Abbey will know exactly what that is. It is the church at night, lit up, and there's just one single light onto the altar, and it's very beautiful, and you go in there and you sense an amazing presence when you go in there. So I was a novice at Worth back in 1983, and I was there for 6 months. It was probably the hardest time in my life, I would say, in many ways. I realized quite soon after going in as a novice that this probably wasn't the life for me. But I had to work out in my mind why. I hadn't met Barbara at that stage. But God had a different destiny for me somewhere out there. Any case, it was a very difficult time. And what happens when you're a novice in a monastery is that it's very deliberately done. You have lots of things taken away from you. I had no meaningful work to do. I had a degree in history and I was cleaning up leaves and stuff like that. We were taken away from our families. We were thrown into the community, and it's meant deliberately to work out whether you have a vocation or not, because no one really knows until they go in and try out. So I was trying it out, and there we are. So stripped down as I was in that process, it was a time of being able to go into the quiet of your heart and find out a little bit more who you are. Not always, as I say, not always easy, but this was a very beautiful moment I'm sharing with you when just in a moment of quiet, of prayer, this word from the Psalms came to me, and it is there. It was you created my being, knit me together in my mother's womb. I thank you for the wonder of my being. I thank you for the wonder of my being. So I think that all of us have a purpose, and the purpose is just to be there and to be loved and to be known, and that occasionally you may get a sort of glimmer of that. But you need to allow yourself the time to retreat a little bit like we are today, and to go into a bit of silence and into the quiet of your heart. And then hopefully some sort of sense of your connection to each other and our connection to God can come through. That's my hope for each person, and I think it's sits at the heart of purpose as to why we're here, is that, basically that's it. I thank you for the wonder of my being. Just think about what that word is saying. I thank you for the wonder of my being. It's extraordinary that I'm here alive on this planet, and it's extraordinary I've got this life.